Hi class. In this lecture here, we're going to begin our study of talking about the relationship between two variables. And there's a lot of concept we're going to cover over this lecture series. We're going to talk about some things called scatter plots, a concept called correlation, something called regression, and then something called time series data. Now, throughout this lecture, we're going to rely, throughout this lecture series, we're going to rely very, very heavily on your TI calculator. So in these lectures here, I'm going to be working with my TI-84 calculator. But if you have a TI-83 calculator, that's okay too. There's going to be slight differences in what you see on your screen here on your TI calculator, but I'll explain those differences as we get through them. But primarily, it's going to be all the same options. Okay. So what we're going to be working on in this section is the following topics. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to understand the relationship between two variables, and then we're going to talk about a visual representation of the relationship called scatter plots. So these first two bullet points are going to be covered in this lecture here. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to move into a lecture on a topic called correlation. That's going to be a second video. Then we're going to talk about a concept called regression. That will be a third video. And then we'll end on something called time series data, and we'll relate that to regression, something called time series regression. That'll be a fourth video, lecture number 4. Okay. All right, so let's jump into it. You're going to notice that throughout all these lectures here, at least the first couple, we're going to be doing one example, like building the concepts through it. So, make sure that as you're watching these lectures, you're following along with the example here. Okay. So the relationship between two variables and scatter plots is where we're going to start. Suppose your instructor, me, is interested in seeing if the amount of time students spend, so a little bit of time students spend studying has an influence on their grade. I mean, I would think so, right? Like, just in general, what you would think is, this is what I think, okay? The more you study, the higher your grade. Generally. I mean, there's a lot of things that determine a student's grade, but, generally, the more you study, the higher your grade's going to be. So for a recent exam, let's just not, we'll take a different course. So in a recent exam in his statistics course, so one of other courses I teaches, your instructor randomly samples 8 students and observes the following. So I have 2 variables, each on one student, okay? So student 1 studied for 1 hour, and they got a 50 on the exam. Student 2, they studied for 2 hours, got a 54. Student 3 studied for 3 hours, they got a 60. Student 4 studied for 4 hours, they got a 65. Got to be careful here. Notice how I have nobody for 5 hours. Okay, student 5, they studied for 6 hours, got a 78. Student 6 studied for 7 hours, got an 82. Student 7 studied for 8 hours, got an 85. And then finally, student 8, they studied for 9 hours and they got an 88. All right. So this was just an exam. So, think about this as how much they studied over the week previously. All right. For this, maybe it was a final exam or something. All right. So basically what you are seeing here, just with the general look, is you are seeing that as the number of hours of study increase, so does the exam grade. And okay, that's great. So now what we want to do is we want to talk about putting some vernacular, some definitions to these 2 different variables here. Okay, so we have types of variables. We have what's called a response variable. All right, is the value whose value can be explained by the value of what we call the explanatory or predictor variable. Okay, so here we have predictor. I'm always going to call it predictor variable. And then we have something called the response variable. All right, in mathematics, when you have 2 variables, we have generally let them be represented by the letters x and y. So what we're going to do is our predictor variable is going to be the x variable, and our response variable is going to be the y variable. All right, so think about this. Go back to the example. which variable do you think explains the other? Okay, so which variable predicts the other value? And here's the deal. I think hours of study predicts or explains someone's exam score, right? That's what we're thinking. Like, you're putting in the hours of study, and what that is doing, what's responding to those hours of study is your exam score. All right, so here we have the predictor variable is hours of study, and our response variable is the exam scores. All right, so just going back, I'd like to put this right on top here so we can see it. This is going to be my x variable, and this is going to be my y variable, okay? This is going to be the predictor, and this is the response. Okay. Next, now we want to talk about, now that we've kind of, if you remember maybe some of your algebra classes, when we have, x, y variables, so you can think about these as ordered pairs now, okay? 150, 254. Now what we want to do is talk about how you plot and show the visual representation of this relationship. And the visual of this data is what's called a scatter plot. So a scatter plot is a graph that shows the relationship between two quantitative variables measured on the same individual. And that's what we have. We have two variables measured on the same individual. All right, each individual in the data set is represented by just a single point in the scatter diagram. So the explanatory variable is plotted on the horizontal axis, and the response variable is plotted on the vertical axis. So basically what's going on here is we have this scatter plot. And we're always going to draw the first quadrant of the Cartesian plane. And along the horizontal axis, you get your x variable, so the predictor variable. And up here, you get the y variable. The response variable. And what you're going to do is you're going to plot these data values as ordered pairs. Okay, so basically what's going to happen is each student is going to be represented by one little square. Okay, so you're going to plot points as ordered pairs. All right. So let me show you with our example how we're going to do this by hand first initially, and then I'm going to show you your how to use your graphing calculator to make this really, really, really straightforward. Okay, so look here. So here we have the hours of study. That's going to be our x variable, and our exam scores is going to be the y variable. So hours of study, and up here y. All right, this is going to be our exam scores. So look, none of this is going to be specifically drawn to scale, but look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tick marks down here. So my x variable has to go through 1 to 9. So we'll start at 0, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'll put 10 over here. And then look, our exam score is going to have to go from 50 to 88. So if I start at 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90. Okay, so that can work. I can go by fives. So I'll start this scale here down at 50. And that's okay. You can do a little break here, all right, to get the scale to what you need. And that's fine. And now look, all you're going to do is plot these as ordered pairs. So watch when I do this. 1, 50. So my first person is here. That's my first data point. 2, 54. So 2, 54. You can plot it as circles. I'm doing it as little rectangles here. That's fine too. 360. So 3, and I'm just eyeballing this, so bear with me. It's not perfect. 465. 678, so just be careful. 6, and then 78 is kind of way up here. 782, 7 and then 82. 885, 8 is over here. So you can see, you know, even by hand it's a little tough here. 885, and then 988. So not, you know, a little off, but you know, it's because I'm doing this by hand. And look, this is what the graph looks like. Okay, and what do we see here? We definitely see an upward trend, upward trend. So when it's going upwards like this is what we call a positive. And then look, does it kind of, it's not a perfect straight line, but does it look like it follows a straight line? Yeah, absolutely. The pattern is definitely what we call linear. So it's a positive linear relationship. So what this is saying is the more you study, so the more hours you study, the higher your grade. All right, so the scatter plots here, okay, looking at this, I want to show you now how you can do this very, very easily in your graphing calculator, okay? So, you know, primarily what we're going to do going forward is we're going to use this, plug this stuff into our calculator. All right, so everybody, as you're watching, grab your calculator, okay? And what we're going to do together is we're going to start off by resetting our calculator. That's incredibly important. Okay, so please, as you're watching this, let's reset your calculator. So to reset your calculator, there's this button down here, this MEM button. So you're going to hit second function and then MEM. And you're going to want number 7 to reset. You're going to want number 1 for all RAM. And then you're going to want number 2 to reset it. All right, oftentimes, this is just a tip. Oftentimes when you are make an error in your calculator or it's not giving you the result you want, just reset your calculator. Reset your calculator and start over, okay? Okay, so to plug data into your calculator, you're going to hit the stat button, okay? And under number 1 here, okay, you're going to want to edit the list. And what's really important is you should see L1 and L2 up here, okay? Your X variable always goes in L1, okay? So, and then in L2, you're always going to put the Y variable. Always, always. You have to do it that way. So look, just make sure you don't make a mistake here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, you're skipping 5. 6. I have no data for a student who studied for 5 hours. 7, 8, and 9. And then you have to make sure that you pair it perfectly with these values over here. So 50, 54, 60, 65, 78, 82, 85, and 88. Okay? Now you have to be careful because if you just, if you're used to a graphing calculator and you just press graph, you're like, okay, I got the data in, let me graph. You're not going to see anything, okay? There's this button up here called stat plot, okay? So you're going to go second function and then the y equals to get stat plot. And it's going to say plot 1 ... off. What you need to do is you need to turn that on. So you're going to hit enter. And right here, you're going to hit enter to turn it on, okay? And here, down here, this right here is your scatter plot. Right here, your scatter plot right here. Okay, so we're gonna leave this as on. Okay, that's gonna be perfectly done. It's gonna be on right there. We're gonna make sure that's selected. Now, if you hit graph again, you're still not gonna see anything. So what you have to do is you have to go to your zoom button. And then there's this option number 9 called zoom stat. Okay, you're going to use this to zoom in on what you want, your data that you plugged in. And now you should see this, okay? And that's exactly what we see here. right? So we have our data, and you can see here, you can see that positive linear relationship, okay? All right, so scatter plots. Scatter plots tell us a lot about the relationship, okay? Scatter plots explain the relationship. All right, they explain the relationship between the variables. Okay. And so what you can see here is these are the type of variables that, or the type of relationships you're going to see in the scatter diagrams or scatter plots, okay? When you see a scatter plot and it's going upward like this, it's explaining the relationship. It's saying it's a linear relationship. Okay, this is a positive linear relationship. When you see a scatter plot and it's going, the data is going down like this, it's also, you're seeing a straight pattern here, but this is a negative linear relationship. And A and B is where we're going to spend our time. Is what we're going to be learning, is the relationships we're going to study. Okay, so we're going to study linear relationships, all right, both positive and negative. Okay, that's what we're going to spend our time on. Now there's other types of relationships, and we're not going to study these, but I want you to be aware of them. This right here, this relationship's explaining the relationships. It's saying it's nonlinear, it's quadratic. This one here looks like a cubic relationship. It's a nonlinear. And this one has no discernible pattern. Even if we add more points, it's all over the place, This scatter plot still explains the relationship. It says that there's no relationship. All right, class, so that was just a quick introduction to the basic terminology in scatter plots. And we're going to continue with this example about the hours of study and exam score in our next video, when we're going to start talking about a concept called correlation. So I'll continue this series, the next video, with this concept of correlation.